appreciate them being flexible about that. Also want to welcome our colleagues, particularly from Mizzou. I feel bad for all of you, not just because you go there, but because the value of your college education has now been halved. Anybody who gets a degree from Mizzou is now going to be tainted, unfortunately, with what's going on there. And this is true for colleges across the nation. We'll get to what's going on at the colleges in a little while. But what I want to talk about today is some practical tactics that you can use to fight folks on the left, because obviously this has become the main mission of the right. I mean, it feels like we are now in a bunker, right? That's being in California my entire life. It's always felt like I'm in a bunker. Being at UCLA was a bunker, Harvard Law was a bunker. But if you're on a university campus or you're headed to a campus, you're going to be in the bunker. And you have to have a bunker mentality. And what the left really seeks to do is silence you. This is all they really want out of life, is to just shut you up. And you can see it right now this just broke across the wires today, that at Amherst College, they've now asked the administration to literally punish people who put up posters that said on them the words free speech. They said if it says free speech on the poster, that is offensive, it's a microaggression, and therefore we want these people prosecuted. Over at Mizzou, the university police issued a communique suggesting that anyone who had their feelings hurt should call the cops, to which I immediately tweeted out the phone number for the cops and told everybody to call the cops about Melissa Click, that professor who was yelling at the reporter over at University of Missouri. Silencing you is their first priority. The only way that the left can win, the only way they can continue to live in this fantasy reality they've created for themselves, is to shut you up. I don't know how many of you watch South Park and have seen the Safe Space song, which has been going around. But that's pretty much it. The only way to win is to silence reality. Reality has to be shut up, and you are reality. Anybody who speaks truth is reality. You notice folks on the left like to use the phrase, you'll hear this one a lot, that you're impinging on my truth. Well, as those of us who live in the real world know, there's no such thing as my truth or your truth. There is just the truth, right? It's either true or it's false. But in order for them to maintain the my truth idea of the universe, the truth has to be silenced. And so your job is to not be silent. So here are 10 rules for fighting the left. These are practical rules for debating folks on the left. I try to be practical because I know that you'll hear a lot of speeches about ideology and philosophy of conservatism, but there are fewer people who talk about the tactics and strategy you should use in dealing with folks on the left, and fewer still who will tell you actual practical strategies as opposed to how to discuss the politics of the issue. So here are practical strategies that you can use. The first strategy is more mentality. When you're in debate with somebody on the left, well, before I even get there, why should you debate somebody on the left? And when should you debate somebody on the left? The truth is, you shouldn't always debate people on the left. When you're on college campuses, there are really only a few reasons to debate anyone on the left in the first place. The first is that you are forced to under the rules of the classroom for some odd reason. The second is because they're serving you food, which is a high likelihood, and they're going to spit in it unless you talk politics with them. And the only other reason is if the person happens to be an honest leftist. You found the one honest leftist in America, congratulations, it's unlikely. So the only other reason that you should ever have a conversation or be friends with anyone on the left is, and not even be friends, is if you are in public in front of a large audience, and then your goal is to humiliate them as badly as possible. That is the goal of the conversation. The goal is not to convince the person. The goal is not to make friends with that person. If you want to make friends with the person, there's a whole different conversation you can have. But the conversations that are going to make the most difference on campus are the ones where you're in public in front of large groups of people or with a camera nearby, and your goal then is to make these people look as bad as possible, to unmask them before the world. That is the goal. Which sounds harsh until you realize that that's what they're doing to you each and every day. That's what they're doing on CNN. That's what they're doing on MSNBC. That's what they're doing to all the Republican candidates. It's what they did in the first 3 debates were all about trying to make Republicans look bad, try to make conservatives look bad. That's the goal, to make you look like a bad person. You have to go in with the mentality that you're going to hit them first and you're going to hit them hard and they're not going to get up. And so that's the first lesson, okay? You don't wait to be hit. You don't wait to get aggressive. You assume from the outset that you're going to be aggressive. And then if you're a little over-aggressive, then you back off. But you go in aggressive. Better to be too aggressive at the outset than the opposite. And that takes us to the second rule, which is you must frame your opponent. Okay, this is something that people on the right don't like to do, because by nature we're sort of nice, gentle, easygoing folk with families and lives, and this is not our first priority. This is why the left wins. So, why did Mitt Romney lose in 2012? Right? This is a good example of framing your opponent. Why did Mitt Romney lose in 2012? Mitt Romney lost in 2012. He had bad computer programs. Orca died on him. He had various bad get-out-the-vote strategies. He made some boo-boos. The real reason that Mitt Romney lost in 2012 is because Mitt Romney basically characterized Barack Obama as a nice guy who was incompetent. And Barack Obama characterized Mitt Romney as an evil Darth Vader piece of human debris. Barack Obama basically said that Mitt Romney was the guy who would put dogs on the top of cars. Mitt Romney was the guy who was going to, in the words of Vice President Joe Biden, put y'all back in chains. Mitt Romney was the fellow who was going to specifically fire you so that a few years later you would lack health insurance and your wife would die of cancer. Right? That's who Mitt Romney was. Mitt Romney was a bad guy. Mitt Romney, and for those of us who are not leftists, this seems bizarre because Mitt Romney is actually one of the more vanilla people on planet Earth. But the implication, if you talk to folks on the left, the idea is that Mitt Romney was a bad man. He was a bad, mean man. And from the right, the perspective on Obama is that Obama, he wasn't really a bad, mean man. Obama was just a guy who's not very good at his job. So if you're just a voter and you don't know much about anything, and remember, always remember your audience. You're not talking to the leftist. You're talking to the people watching you talk to the leftist, right? So those people, when they went into the ballot box to vote, they had to decide, do I vote for the guy who is mean but competent, or the guy who's really, really nice and has the best intentions at heart, but just isn't that great at his job? And people in the United States tend to vote for nice but incompetent over mean but competent any day of the week. So the goal of the left is to characterize you as mean and nasty and corrupt and evil. And you know this. If you talk to people on the left, the first thing on any topic that they will say is that you are a racist, a sexist, a bigot, or a homophobe. That's not an argument. That is a character attack. It's a character assault. They're saying you are a bad human being, and thus I can say whatever I want to you now. That's why the calls of white privilege are a character attack on you. Right? They don't even have to prove you're a racist. Just by the nature of you being white or being non-black, or even if you are black and conservative, you're a beneficiary of white privilege. Like Ben Carson, it's okay to call him a beneficiary of white privilege, even though he is not. You know, all of this is okay because your character is flawed. Because your character is flawed, they can attack you. So your goal is to attack their character. And this is something people on the right get really shy about. Right? We don't like to do it because it's not nice. Well, tough. Do it. Because the truth is that when you say things like you're a racist without evidence, you are a bad person. And the way that I learned this lesson pretty well, or at least taught it relatively well, is I don't know how many of you saw the debate that I did with Piers Morgan about 3 years ago on gun control. It went a little bit viral. And Piers Morgan had been pushing this notion that anybody who disagreed with him about gun control didn't care enough about the dead kids in Sandy Hook. I did this debate with him on national TV about a month after the Sandy Hook Elementary Massacre. And so we start off the debate, and literally the first thing that happens is he says to me, "You've said I'm off the rails. Why do you say I'm off the rails?" And I said, "Piers, I say you're off the rails because you stand on the graves of the kids of Sandy Hook to promote your political agenda." And he collapsed. I mean, there was nothing he could do. He clutched at his pearls and he said, "How dare you?" And I said, "Well, I've watched your show. I know that that's true." And he said, "How dare you?" I said, "Well, that's not an argument, right? I've seen your show. It's true." The reason that he couldn't come back is because he was so used to attacking the character of the person sitting across from him that he wasn't used to the idea that now he was going to have to defend his own character for making allegations that were utterly false. So if someone makes a false allegation about you, if they dump racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe on you, the first thing you should say is you're a jerk. Right? You're a jerk. And what makes you a jerk is not that I just think that you're wrong on your politics. What makes you a jerk is that you're leveraging unevidenced allegations against people specifically to promote your political agenda. That makes you a jerk. And that's okay. You can do that. And in fact, you can even open that way, right? It's okay. You don't even have to respond that way. As long as you know that they're going to do that, you can call out the tactic before it's used. So that's point number 2. Third point, you need to frame the debate. What I mean by this is that the left is great at framing the terminology of the debates and how these debates are going to be held. And the right is terrible at it. So, for example, the Million Student March, right? They're out there marching right now, and they say, we want free education. Education is a right, not just for the rich and white, right? This is their little chant, which, of course, comes as a shock to no one that it turns into a race thing, because everything turns into a race thing. So the idea is to frame the debate as education is a right. Now you're on the other end. You have to explain why education is not a right. Right? You should reject that framing of the debate. The debate is not whether education is a right, because obviously it's not. I mean, education is not a right any more than housing is a right. Nothing is a right that you have to steal from someone else. Right? Bottom line is the only rights that you have are rights that exist in the absence of you stealing stuff from other people. Right? I don't have a right to your services. I don't have a right to your money. I don't have a right to your car. I don't have a right to your wife. I don't have a right to any of these things. right? What I have a right to is you leaving me alone, right? But you don't even have to go there, right? Once they say education is a right, people automatically, their minds, it's just the way the brain works, people go, rights are good. So rights are good, and they say education is a right. That means education is good. And you want to deprive these poor kids of education? Instead of arguing education is a right, you should ask a very basic question. Why is it okay for you to steal other people's money? What makes you morally superior that you get to steal other people's money? When you say you want a free education, what you're really saying is that you are owed my money, that you get to steal my money for your own lesbian dance theory major. And guess what? You don't. Your useless major in ancient Greek economics is of no concern to me. And not only that, you are a morally deficient human being. Remember, all of leftism is based on unearned moral superiority, them feeling like better people than you. You take that away from them, they've got nothing. So if you say to them, it is morally deficient to steal from people. It is morally deficient. I mean, this was actually my objection. How many of you did any of you see the Neil Cavuto debate yesterday? There's a girl from the Million Student March who's on Neil Cavuto, and she clearly had no idea how the economy works, or the English language, or fundamental punctuation, anything. And so she's there, and Neil Cavuto is asking her, where do you think all this money's coming from? And I thought, okay, well, this is sort of useful, because it's clear she doesn't know what she's talking about, but it wasn't useful in the sense that nobody who was on the fence came out of that on Cavuto's side, because the premise was still her premise. Her premise was, it's okay to take money from the 1%. When people say, the 1% will pay for it, the answer shouldn't be, well, the 1% won't be able to afford it, because that's assuming their morality. It's okay to take money from the 1%. The answer should be, what makes you think it is okay to steal money from people, period? Do you just get to rob people's houses? Is this your thing? Right? You're allowed to ask that question. Okay, fourth point. You need to spot inconsistencies in the left's argument. The left rarely, if ever, they're getting actually more consistent now because they're coming out as the communists that they are. But usually, the left argues from a position of not full communism. It's actually harder in some ways to argue with Bernie Sanders than it is to argue with Hillary Clinton. It's pretty easy to argue with Hillary Clinton because she's wildly inconsistent. Right? Every leftist position holds an internal inconsistency. All of them. Because if they took it to the logical extreme, the left will never take its own positions to the logical extreme because their positions are so offensive and terrible to the vast majority of Americans. The obvious example that comes to mind for me on this one is when you hear people like President Obama say he wants common sense gun regulations, right? Or Hillary Clinton, common sense gun regulations. That's all we want, common sense gun regulations. And then you say, okay, well, what do those look like? And they have no answer. And usually they say something like the assault weapons ban, right? We want to ban assault weapons. So you say, okay, well, you want to ban assault weapons because theoretically this is going to minimize murder, correct? Well, then why is it that there are twice as many assault weapons in the country, right, rifles and long guns in the country as there are handguns, and yet there are about 6 to 7 times as many murders committed with handguns as long guns, but you don't want to get rid of the handguns. And you can see their eyes glaze over because the inconsistency is so glaring. Because the truth is, what you want them to do, your goal here is to force them into a consistency, right? You want to force them to admit that what they really want to do is take all the guns. Which is what they want to do. That's what the left wants to do. The left wants all the guns. The left wants Australia, Great Britain. They want all the guns. And the minute they admit that, they lose the argument because this is a country with 300 million guns and 200 million Americans with guns. So the idea that there's going to be a huge swath of Americans who buy into this is just not true. So spot the inconsistencies, and we can do it in any of their arguments. Right? You can do it. What Carly Fiorina did during the debates about Planned Parenthood was great because it shows the inconsistency of the left. They say they're pro-choice, and they say that it's a moderate position to be pro-choice. And then, I mean, honestly, I wish that she had actually just brought a picture of a baby at 27 weeks and said, Hillary Clinton wants to kill this, wants you to be able to kill this. Please explain why. Right? It's the inconsistency. You're pro-life, you're pro-children, but you're okay with killing this. Right? If you show them the inconsistencies in their positions, people resonate to arguments about hypocrisy, and the left are hypocrites unless they go full scale. And if they go full scale, they're extremists. Fifth point, you need to force them to answer questions. So when I say be aggressive, what that really means is asking them the questions. The left loves to ask questions, and it's usually questions like, why do you hate gay people? Right? It's always questions like, so you hate black people, right? Or how much do you, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Ku Klux Klan and 1 being John Birch Society, how much do you hate black people? Right? And your job is to force them to answer questions about their own philosophy. Because the truth is, especially on campus, most people who consider themselves left actually aren't. They don't know what they're talking about. They've just bought into whatever they're hearing around them so they can go to all the cool kid parties and they can be part of the tolerant and diverse majority, right? They can be part of that free exchange of idea. And so it is vitally important to get them to answer questions, because at a certain point, either they will start to examine their own premises, or the people who are watching will start to examine the inconsistencies that they're seeing among these various positions. The sixth point: don't get distracted. So this still happens some, but a little bit less now since we're so many years away from Bush. The usual distraction tactic of the left was, if you said anything about Obama ever, the answer was, but Bush. They just start yelling it. It didn't matter what you were talking about. It didn't matter the topic. It would just they start yelling, and like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, green vomit would start flying out of their mouth, and they would just shout Bush over and over until they collapsed in a stupor. And then their fellows would clap and tell them they'd won the argument. So, the right has an unfortunate tendency to follow people down rabbit holes. So Ted Cruz, who I love, I think Ted Cruz is a great candidate. I think that he has flaws as a candidate, but he's a very solid conservative. He did this the other night in the debate, and it is kind of his fault, since I know people who had told him not to do it. But he was asked very specific questions about his tax plan by Neil Cavuto. And he forgot that there was an audience, and he just started getting very specific about his tax plan. And even I, who am very into this stuff, my eyes glazed over and I was lost. When you're arguing with people on the left, it's even worse. What they will do is they'll throw out red herrings. Usually, the most common red herring you hear is gay marriage, always, because this is a topic on which the left feels comfortable. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. They will throw out either gay marriage or abortion or birth control, right? These are their favorites. So Hillary Clinton, anytime you say, we want smaller government, Hillary will say, well, except for abortion. Let's talk about abortion, right? Which has nothing to do with anything, because I'm also in favor of big government for prosecution of murder. When it comes to criminal law, there's nothing wrong with a government enforcement of criminal law. That's the whole question on the table. But the idea here by the left is always, when they're in trouble, they distract. When they're in trouble, they throw something against the wall. It's okay for you to say, we'll get back to that issue later. If you want to discuss George W. Bush's record in Iraq and not Obama's with regard to ISIS, we can do that later. I'm happy to talk about that later. But why don't we actually talk about the guy who's in office? Let's talk about what's happening now. Like, we can also have a conversation about Woodrow Wilson's policies towards the Russian Revolution, but we'll save that for later, right? Well, let's talk about the topic that we're talking about right now. You have to pin them down. Because trying to argue with leftists, they stick and move. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. They're constantly just moving around. They're very slippery. Okay. The seventh point is, if you don't know something, you're allowed to admit it. You're allowed to admit it. So usually, leftists don't have a lot of facts in their tiny brains, but they usually have one. And it's usually one that you don't know, because it's completely irrelevant to anything. Right? It's some topic that they studied as their thesis in philosophy, their third-year philosophy thesis, and it's some minute point of leftist philosophy that you've never heard of, or it's some fact about colonialism that they're dragging up from a Howard Zinn book that they read 4 years ago, and you don't know what they're talking about. And it's okay for you to, instead of you trying to you don't have to know everything in the world. No one knows everything in the world. I mean, really. And so it's okay for you to say, I haven't heard about that. I'll check it out. After I confirm that, I'm happy to talk about that. But, I don't know enough about that to really have this conversation. It's perfectly okay to do this. This is actually a crucial mistake that so many presidential candidates make. Right? You see presidential candidates, and they feel like they have to answer every question that's asked to them. And so they'll say things that just get them in trouble. Right? Even in debate, they'll say things that get them in trouble. And Donald Trump did this when he was on with Hugh Hewitt. And Hugh Hewitt asked him about the Al-Quds Force, right? And he immediately thought that Hewitt was talking about the Kurds, and he started talking about the Kurds because he didn't know anything about the Al-Quds Force, right? So he started sounding idiotic because he didn't know what he was talking about. He would have been better off to say, that's not an issue on which I've studied up, but that's why I have experts like you, Hugh, to tell me about it, right? You're okay doing that. You don't always have to pretend that you know everything that there is to know. It's a good life rule. It's actually a really good marital rule as well. Eighth rule, don't get sucked in by the paradigm. Okay, so many of us, we're right-wing, we're conservative, we're Republican, and we all love Reagan, for example, right? Love Reagan. Reagan's great. I love Reagan too. Okay, so one of the things that the left will do, and you'll see it on immigration, for example, is the left will say things like, well, how could you be so hard line on illegal immigration when Reagan signed into law amnesty in '86. Right? And the idea is that Reagan's one of yours, and so you have to defend him. No matter what, you have to defend the paradigm. You must defend the paradigm. You don't have to defend the paradigm. You're allowed to say that Ronald Reagan got it wrong. Because on that one, Ronald Reagan, in my opinion, got it wrong. He got a lot of bigger things right, like taking down the Soviet Union. Right? His economic policies were right, but like everybody else, he was a flawed human being, and he would have been the first to admit it. And the same is true for George W. Bush. This is actually very important because they'll bring up Bush a lot. You're allowed to say George W. Bush was wrong. Right? You're allowed to say that George W. Bush's second term was kind of a horror show, because it was kind of a horror show. You don't have to buy into everything that your side did, because it's not a team's politics. It's not really a team sport. Politics is about individual philosophies. And is your individual philosophy good or is it bad? And this is why, for example, I consider myself a conservative first and not a Republican. Republican is just the party that has the candidates for whom I tend to vote, but my principles are not Republican principles. They're conservative principles, and should the Republican Party move away from those principles, then I won't vote for that particular candidate. You don't have to buy into whatever paradigm you're being pushed into by the left. Okay, that's just a general rule. Ninth point of argument, and this is one that's kind of fun that you can use. It's a fun parlor trick to use with leftists you have to talk to, and that is let the other side have meaningless victories. And what I mean by this is then you'll have conversations with people on the left, and they'll say certain things and not define their terms. And their goal is to make you argumentative on every point so that you look like you're extreme. Right? They'll say things, and then you feel the need to argue with them. You feel the need to come back at them because they're so wrong on everything, and they are. But if you give them a point that's almost meaningless, then you can sometimes box them in. So, for example, one of their favorites, they love using terms that don't mean anything. Right? They like saying things like, are you in favor of immigration reform is a good one. Right? Are you in favor of immigration reform? And the tendency is to say, no, I'm not in favor of immigration reform if you're hardcore on immigration. You can also say, sure, I'm in favor of immigration reform. What kind of immigration reform are you talking about? So for a second, they feel like they won, and then they didn't, because you take it away from them, asking them for definitions. Right? They do this on climate change, too. Say, do you believe in climate change? Are you a climate denier? Like, no, I don't deny the climate. It exists. Right? Do you believe in climate change? Well, yes. I mean, the climate changes. What are you talking about? Would you like to get more specific? Now, do you know, for example, what percentage of human activity is responsible for the rise in climate? Do you have any clue what we would have to do in order to minimize human activity so as to go back to the amounts of carbon that were being sent into the atmosphere before the industrial age? Is that something that you're willing to? How many people are you willing to let die? How many people are you willing to impoverish based on lack of carbon-based fuels? How many people are you willing to let suffer in order to do this? In the third world, by the way, because those are the people who are going to suffer if they're not using carbon-based fuels. People on the left are very fond. They have this kind of rosy picture of what it would be like to go back in time. They would still get to keep their iPhone, but they'd go back in time. If they really want to go back in time, there is a time machine on this planet. It's called an airplane. All you have to do is fly to the third world, and you just went back about 70 years in time. Right? And the fact is they don't want to live with that. So you're allowed to give them these kind of minor victories where you say, oh, yeah, sure, climate change. But then you hone in, right? Because they feel like they're on their home turf, and then you flip it on them, and it's a really fun little trick. Okay, final point when it comes to arguing with the left and defeating them. And this is body language really counts a lot. Body language is huge. Very few Republicans actually understand the necessities of body language. One of the reasons Marco Rubio is so popular right now is because his body language is tremendous. He's got really good body language. He's always very open. He's always very upbeat. He doesn't look like he's upset or angry up there. Well, Jeb Bush, by contrast, has the worst body language of any candidate in the field. Jeb Bush looks like Kermit the Frog in desperate need of laxatives. And whenever he's on the stage, it's just, he's so, I mean, his campaign slogan, honestly, his campaign slogan should be awkward, ! Because he's just so awkward up there. I mean, regardless of what you think of his policies, he is not good when he's on these debate stages. This is one of the things that Republicans need to understand, is that image actually matters. So today I'm dressed really poorly. Normally I dress a lot better. Didn't have time to get up to the nines today. But people, when I changed my haircut after I did the Piers Morgan interview, because there were a bunch of friends I had in Hollywood, and they said, your haircut's terrible, and you look like a college Republican president. No offense. And And so I actually had to pay a stylist to come in and redo my hair and redo my wardrobe because I was going to be on TV a lot. And this sounds stupid because it kind of is, and this is how America works also. Right? The reason that Donald Trump is actually continuing to do well is because regardless of what you think of him, and my own take on him is that he's a buffoon, Donald Trump is great at TV. He is tremendous at TV because he spent years doing it, right? He spent years being on reality TV. He's fun to watch. If you just turn off the sound on a debate one time and watch the debate, the only one that you'll be watching is Trump. And he's really amusing. I mean, I've described him as Fat Lion. Like, he kind of sits in his cave, and you poke at him, and you poke at him, and nothing happens. And then you poke him one time too many, and he saunters out, and he kind of sways, and then he eats your face. But Trump, he's got an image, and he presents that image to the world. Everybody has an image they present to the world. And the left is better at this than the right. So the example that I typically like to use is back in 2008, Barack Obama. No, you should all be old enough to at least remember this, although you're probably kids because it's 7 years ago. Do you remember Barack Obama speaking at his DNC, and he comes out descending from the clouds? I mean, they literally had mist machines right across the stage, and he comes out descending from the clouds, and behind him is the Greek Pantheon. You remember all of this? He's got the big Greek columns, and he's got 60,000 people in the stadium. They're all going nuts, and they're all taking pictures with their cell phones, and all is flashing. I mean, it's like a Jay-Z concert. It's unbelievable. And it's great. I mean, terrific TV. And then he gets up there and he says all of the nasty BS that we're used to hearing from him for the last 7 years. And he pretends that he's a good guy and everybody buys into it because he's a celeb, right? And this makes sense because if you recall, the person who was doing his voiceovers was Tom Hanks, and he had an Oscar-winning director doing all of his videos, right? He really took this stuff seriously. And then you went over to the RNC, and there was John McCain, and John McCain sort of toddles out there. And John McCain is an older guy, and he also has physical infirmities from his time in Vietnam. So he has that against him just imagistically to start. But then they decide for some odd reason that behind him they're going to put a green screen. Not like a green screen like Lord of the Rings green screen. We're going to project something cool. There will be like military. We'll have pictures of him from his past and aircraft carriers and military imagery. No, we're just going to have a lime green screen on national television for 20 minutes while this old man talks into the microphone. It looked like he was going to shoot a pornography in the San Fernando Valley. And you contrast that with the magic of Obama, and there was no contrast. If you're just the person who's watching this on TV, it looks like one group has their stuff together and the other group totally does not. Okay, so this is true for you. There are certain imagistic things that you can do that are very easy. The biggest one is open body language, right? So no fists, none of this. We all tend to do it. Everybody does it. When you tense up during conversation, your voice tends to rise. Keep your voice low. This is actually what's driving Donald Trump insane right now is that Ben Carson is almost inaudible all the time. I mean, you have to check whether his microphone is on when his microphone is on. And so Trump, who is he's like a Spinal Tap 11 on the scale of 10, and Carson is just, he's so taciturn that it's impossible for Trump to handle him. He can't do anything about it, right? So you had Trump going nuts last night, like purely nuts. I mean, have you seen clips from his speech last night, Trump? He gets out from behind the podium and reenacts being stabbed in the belt. Yeah. It's wild. So he does that. He did that last night in Iowa after calling Iowan voters stupid for giving Ben Carson the lead. And then Ben Carson did what he does best, which is he ticked off Donald Trump beyond all human measure by saying that he would pray for Donald Trump. This is how imagistics and body image can be your friend. If Donald Trump is going to be aggressive, then you just be passive. You just be passive. We're just here to have a conversation. You can say the nastiest things and be super passive about it, and you can get away with it so long as your body language is not nasty and aggressive. So body language does matter. I mean, Bill Clinton was the master of body language for a variety of reasons, and one of the things that he learned, he trained with people to do a lot of this stuff. Like you'll see Rubio using some of the same hand motions. So Clinton had the hand motion where instead of pointing at people, he didn't do the Bill O'Reilly finger of truth, which is I'm strong and I know better than you, right? The factor. It was instead Bill Clinton doing this, right? It's the elevator button push, right? Because he's convincing you and he's strong, but he's not too strong, right? He's just trying to wheedle you. And Bill Clinton had several different types of he is the master of this. He had several different types of handshakes. He has a handshake that's just for people who who he is meeting in passing, right? It's a regular handshake. And then he's got the handshake for people who he might hit up for money later, which is he grabs the hand here, and then the other hand goes on the forearm. He has the one for people who are already big donors. He goes to the shoulder, and then he has the one for Clinton Foundation donors from Zimbabwe, and that's like all the way up to the neck. It's almost a hug. And then he has one for Monica Lewinsky, and that's totally different. So body language does matter in all of this. So those are your 10 quick lessons. Hit first, frame your opponent, frame the debate, spot inconsistencies in their arguments, force them to answer questions. Don't get distracted. If you don't know something, admit it. Don't get sucked in by the paradigm. Make sure that you let the other side have a meaningless victory or two so they feel like they're accepted, and then use good body language at all times. The bottom line here is that every time you walk out now, if you're going to be a conservative and you're going to be a fighter, every time you walk out is a fight. There is no such thing as a nice moment from here on in. Now, there are some people who find this off-putting. It is tiring from time to time, so make sure that you actually have a life outside of this. But the fight can be a lot of fun if you're aggressive and if you have fun with it and if you let this stuff roll off your back. You have to make it fun. If it's not fun, it's not worth doing. And fighting bad people and people with horrible ideas is fun. And it is worthwhile. There's not a cause that I think that's out there that's better on earth. And one of the mistakes conservatives have made, I think, with young people is telling them that what they're really fighting for is just capitalism and a better way of life. And it's not fully true. It's true, but it's not fully true. What you're fighting for is a higher cause. And that higher cause is freedom and liberty and a concept of the universe in which duty exists and actions have consequences. And the people who you are fighting, they're not just wrong. The people who you're fighting believe in evil concepts. Leftism is an evil concept. Communism is an evil concept. I mean, you're going to hear about this all this weekend. These are moral issues. These are not just economic issues. This is not just we all get along and we have the same vision for the future. We don't have the same vision for the future. Hillary Clinton has a very different vision for the future than people on the right. Barack Obama clearly has a very different vision for the future than people on the right. These idiot protesters, these mental midgets over at University of Missouri have a very different idea of what the future looks like than everybody on the right. And it's a nasty vision of the future, and it's a gross and racist vision of the future. These Mizzou students complaining about racism, you saw this the other day. They banned white students from their safe space. The KKK fully endorses these safe spaces. They had spaces that were both separate and equal. No one actually said to them I don't know what the water fountain situation was like over at Mizzou in these safe spaces. But it's demonstrative of the fact that the left has awful, awful values. And so fighting those awful values is, to me, the highest calling that you can have in politics. And if it's a fight worth having, it's a fight worth doing right. Thanks so much. Happy to take questions.
Please raise your hand if you have a question, and if you have a question, please also give your name and your school. Andres, back there.
How's your son, and when will you resurrect your radio career?
Well, the radio career never died, so I have a show on 870 in the mornings here, and then I have a podcast that I do online at Daily Wire every day. And my daughter, thank you for asking. She's doing great. She's doing great. My daughter, for people who didn't know, she had a heart surgery, but she's doing fantastically well, and she is fine. And there is no prognosis. I mean, she's totally normal now. There's just a hole in her heart, and there's an ASD. They had to fix it. She's fine, thank God.
My name is Frank Prey, and I'm the chairman of the College Republicans at UNC. As you can tell, I'm a bad haircut. And my question for you is, how do we win the gay marriage debate, seeing as it seems almost like our movement has been entirely defeated on that debate? Okay. So how do we reframe that? This
is a great question. So there's the gay marriage debate there are actually a few different aspects of the gay marriage debate. I think that the gay marriage debate was actually lost decades ago, as soon as people started saying that marriage was about love between two people and not about production and rearing of children. Because once you say marriage is about love between two people, okay, so it can be love between any two people, right? What I've been saying literally for years at this point is that the Republican Party conservatives ought to be arguing that the government should get completely out of the business of marriage. As an Orthodox Jew, I have two marital documents. I have my religious marital document, and I have my state marital document. My state marital document means nothing to me, absolutely nothing. I don't even remember the date on which it was issued. My Jewish marital document, my religious marital document, like most religious people, is the one that means something to me because it meant I could sleep with my wife. So the fact is that it's important. I think that the goal here should be, because what the left is going to do, what they are going to do is, and they are doing it in California, is they are now taking the gay marriage aspect of the law and using it to club into submission everyone who's religious. That's where this is going. So our goal should not even be to win. We can easily win the gay marriage debate on the social cultural level. I'm more worried about losing it on the governmental level. On the social cultural level, there are not that many gay people who want to get married in the United States. Most people still want to. Most people are still straight. And that being the case, the case for marriage is a case that you need to be making on a personal level. But the debate that we're usually having is, what should the government do about it? My view is the government should get completely out of it, because the state has obviously done a terrible job at forwarding marriage, even with all the by the way, anybody who thinks it's a tax benefit to get married has never looked at their taxes. I mean, seriously, because now my wife's income is counted along with mine, so we get taxed in a higher tax bracket because we have combined income. So my view of it is that they try to make it into a moral issue. The state confers, and the state confers some sort of dignity. This is the Anthony Kennedy argument. And my argument has always been, if the state confers dignity on you, you're a sad, sad little person. Because I don't need the state to confer dignity on me. That's not, the state has nothing to say about my dignity or my relationship with my wife, and it shouldn't have. I thought their argument, I mean, talk about inconsistency, I thought their argument is that the state has no power to confer legitimacy on them. Right? Their whole argument is right to privacy. There's nothing private about the state conferring tax benefits. On a rational level also, the idea that you should get tax benefits for sleeping with a member of the same sex is idiotic. I just think that, like, what benefit has accrued to the state that you get a tax benefit for? Usually, in order for you to get a tax benefit, you have to do something that actually helps the economy or does something for the society at large. By the way, I feel this is why there's no cohabitation benefits. Right? The idea of marital benefits was only established because, really, it was established before birth control, and the idea was that if you got married, you were now going to be having sex. Chances were that you would have a kid, and kids are good for society. So that's sort of the argument in favor of traditional marriage generally, but I think the easier argument right now is get the government out of everything, because living in California and watching which way this debate has gone, I don't think that this is a winning debate for Republicans, at least not in the non-cultural sense.
Hey there, my name is Skylar. I'm with the crew from Mizzou. Yeah, we don't have really too good of a reputation right now, but we're trying to convince people that we're not a lost cause. And recently, our MSA vice president, she made a statement today condemning freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. We want to know, what would you do? Like, what is your first step in combating that? Making a statement, or? I
mean, I think that obviously you should speak out. I think that you should put posters up. You should have free speech rallies. I think there's plenty of support for you guys nationwide right now. If you were to open a GoFundMe and say you want to start a free speech movement on campus, you probably raise $1 million overnight. I mean, there's that much support for free speech on campuses. I also think that you should push for you should start a rally, and you should push for the new president of the university who just came out in favor of this movement. You should push for him to resign based on his microaggression against free speech in you. You should have rallies pushing for his resignation. You should push for all the administrators to resign. You should push for Melissa Click to be fired. You should put, this is the professor who tried to shut down the reporter over there. You should push for that associate dean of housing, or Greek life is what it was. Push for her to be fired. You should go for scalps. The left uses all these tactics, and they win, and we should use the same tactics against them. I think the fear of God should be put into the left. They've been living on borrowed time for a very long time here. And there's part of me that looks at the campuses and says, great, let them burn each other down. I mean, these are all the same people who are out. It's kind of funny. Leftist revolutionaries are always eating themselves. Eventually the Leninists eat the Trotskyites. And that's sort of what's happening on campus. It's 2 generations ago, these are the same people who took over the buildings, and now they're being taken out like Robespierre and executed in the public square. And there's something humorous about that, and I have to admit I'm enjoying it mildly. But if you actually want to save the universities and not just watch them burn like the Joker in The Dark Knight, just watch them burn, then use their tactics against them. You should we should have mass movements to force professors and administrators to resign based on their violations of free speech. We should have a movement inside the state of Missouri to cut off funding to the University of Missouri based on their violations of the First Amendment. I'll bet that you could get a state legislator to sponsor that. I'll bet that you could probably get. I'll bet University of Mizzou takes federal cash. I'll bet that you could get. In fact, talk to me. Everybody, here's my email address. Okay, if you have any ideas, my email address is bshapiro@dailywire.com. Email me, because what I would like to do, actually, I mean, now that we're thinking about it, is it would be fun to get, Senator Cruz to sponsor a resolution in the Senate to withdraw funding from federally funded programs at the University of Missouri based on their violations of the First Amendment. Right? We should use every tool at our disposal, because the left does not leave any tools uncovered. This is when politics gets fun, guys. Is when you get rough. Yeah, right. Politics isn't fun if you're playing nice all the time. So it's much more fun to use their tactics against them. There's a lot to be learned from Saul Alinsky. Everybody should go pick up a copy of Rules for Radicals and recognize that the guy may have been evil, but the tactics that he espouses are quite effective.
My name's Anthony Murray. I'm from the University of Tampa. And to back off the first question regarding gay marriage, you said, what we should end up doing is trying to get the government out of the concept of gay marriage and other sections of the government like that. How do we go about doing that?
Well, I mean, I think that there have been movements, actually. I believe the state of Georgia, maybe it was Alabama, actually passed a law saying that it was no longer within the power of the state to marry anybody. So there is a movement to do this. And I think that that's a movement that's well worth embracing, because if we don't do that, then they're going to use gay marriage as a club. Right? We're going to force bakers to cater to gay marriages, because otherwise it's state-sponsored discrimination. They're going to force churches to shut down. They will come after schools. They will force your kids to learn about this stuff, because now the law approves gay marriage. So why should your kid in public school not have to learn about a form of marriage that's equally beautiful and beneficial? So I think that the best thing to do, the state stinks at everything, and the best thing to do is to get the state out of virtually everything.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I was seriously so excited that you were coming. Just wanted to thank you for that.
Oh, thanks.
I'm so glad that your daughter's doing well.
Thank you.
My question for you is, I run a conservative social media account. I have probably roughly around 10,000 followers, and every single day I get slaughtered with the onslaught of insults like you were talking about. But one I don't know how to combat is this crazy, insane movement of being able to pick your gender and decide that. And I don't know how to reply to that. I don't know how to say, you're insane, that's it. But I just want to know. That's a pretty
good way to say it. I mean, it's
But from you, what is the best way to really just attack that from the bottom?
Okay, so I'll tell you a story. I don't know how many of you have seen this on CNN Headline News. I had exactly this debate on Dr. Drew's show a few months ago. It was about 3 months ago. And it was I think, the number1 story on Facebook and Twitter for about 3 days. Because this is why they don't have me on CNN that often. They were talking about Caitlyn Jenner. And the question of the day was why Caitlyn Jenner should or should not receive the ESPN Courage Award. Because, as we all know, the courage to have a boob job, make millions of dollars off of it, have a mental illness that's exploited by television cameras is exactly the same as the courage it took for men to get off boats at the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. I mean, courage is courage, guys. So they had me on this. They had me on this show, and they decided that they were going to seat me directly next to a transgender woman, meaning a man who is delusional and thinks he's a woman. And so I'm sitting next to this dude whose name is Zoe Tur. His former name is Bob Tur, and he's sitting next to me, and this topic comes up. And what I said, they were going around discussing whether or not Caitlyn Jenner was courageous or not courageous. And finally, I just said, I don't understand why we're all humoring mass delusion. Why is the public humoring a delusion? It's not kind to the mentally ill. It's terrible for the mentally ill. As somebody whose grandfather was schizophrenic, it would have been really, really quite terrible if the entire society had said to him, you know what, Nate, you're totally right. The radio is talking to you. Right? It wouldn't have been beneficial to him. It was much more beneficial to him that he was institutionalized, given lithium, and then healed, basically, and was able to live a decent life. The idea that transgender surgery accomplishes anything for people who are quote-unquote transgender is nonsense. The suicide rates are precisely the same before and after the surgery, and they are both in excess of 40%, which is unbelievably high. The idea that society is responsible for transgender suicide is absolute garbage. It is not true. Okay, the fact is that even they've done polls of this. There was a poll from the Anderson School at UCLA, and they found that even transgender people who say they're not questioned about being transgendered, they have exactly the same rate of suicidality, meaning that this is a mental illness, because that rate of suicidality is so far beyond anything that has ever been experienced in any population of humans ever. Seriously, the only comparable rate of suicide to the transgender community today is Jews living under Nazi German rule. That is the only time in human history that there has been that rate of suicide. So I promise you, transgenders are not being treated like Jews under Nazi German rule, so it clearly is not societal impact that is making people suicidal. What's making people suicidal is that this is a mental illness, and it is barbaric to suggest that a man can become a woman and a woman can become a man with a snip of the knife. It's horrifying, and it is mutilation, and it is brutal. And the people who are pushing this have no sympathy for the people who are actually suffering from it. They're forwarding mental illness. They're forwarding mental illness to kids because they want to teach this to children now. And this is one where you're on, I mean, these people, it is unbelievable to me that the left suggests that we're the party of anti-science. Okay, they are the party of vaccines are bad and men can magically become women through some magic man-to-woman machine. Right? It's such utter nonsense. Every cell of Caitlyn Jenner's body has a Y chromosome, except ironically for his sperm cells. Right? So the idea that these are women is just it's utter tripe. And I have to say I am enjoying a little bit how the transgender movement is destroying feminism. That's kind of fun, because the feminists have always argued that men and women are inherently different. Right, men and women are inherent, and women have a beautiful, unique thing to bring to the world. And then, of course, they say a bunch of other crap. But that's the part what they say is true. And now they're saying, but transgenderism says that men and women are exactly the same and can randomly shift. It's weird to hear Hillary Clinton, for example, say, Caitlyn Jenner is a beautiful, lovely woman, and then in the same sentence say, and we need a woman president. It's like, well, that's kind of weird. Why? If men and women are exactly the same, then why do we need a woman president? Right? Men and women are exactly the same. So Barack Obama, without any changes to himself, but if Obama really wanted to jack her in this election, he would do that. He'd come out 2 days before the election and he'd say, I'm the first woman president. Right? And change nothing about himself, right? Because transgenderism suggests you don't have to make physical changes, you don't have to change your dress, you don't have to change anything. Right? If you just decide one day that if Charles Bronson one day decided to saunter on in, take off his gun belt, and mosey on in and sashay on in to the ladies' restroom for a little sitsy on the toilet, then he would be a woman. This is the way that this is. What I love about this particular debate is I think enough Americans are not insane that they will buy the argument that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, considering they have known this since they were small children. My daughter's 21 months old, and she can tell the difference between boys and girls. You have to be college educated to be this stupid.
Hi, my name is Katie. I'm from Loyola Marymount University. Recently, we had our second club day at LMU, and our college Republicans table was confronted by a very liberal woman who accused Republicans of cherry picking in policy. How would you respond to that?
I don't even know what that means, cherry picking on policy. I mean, it's such a vague charge. Did she give any specifics?
She specifically referred to abortion and how we would allow it, but only for rape victims and.
Okay, so I mean, my own position on abortion is that it has nothing to that rape is evil and terrible, and people who commit rape should be castrated or killed, and also, a human life is a human life, right? This is my own position on this, and the two have nothing to do with each other. And you can have tremendous sympathy for somebody who is raped and then is pregnant, but that doesn't change whether or not there's a child in there. This is my own position on this particular issue. I do think that it is internally inconsistent for people to support the pro-life position, but then make exceptions for rape and incest. I think that's at least because the cause of the life is not at issue. It's the definition of life that's at issue. This is my own position on it. I can't defend a position I don't hold. So if that's her main criticism, then I accept that criticism. If her criticism is on the other, does she believe? I mean, what I would do if I were you is I would turn it around and I would ask her how late an abortion is okay with her. Like, is she okay with an abortion? She says presumably she doesn't want to kill babies, right? So at what point would she cut it off? Because if there's any day at which she would cut it off, she's not pro-choice, she's pro-life. It's just a question as to the gradation of pro-life, right? If 3 days before, is she okay with killing a baby 3 days before birth? Is she okay with partial birth abortion? And if she said the day before birth? Okay, was there anybody there to watch this debate, or was it just a useless debate? Sorry, these are important.
There were several people.
Okay, so if there are several people, then at that point what I would do is I would bring up a picture of a premature baby born 3 days early, and I would say, okay, so you would kill this. The only difference is that this baby has traveled through the vaginal canal, and the one you would kill hasn't. Is the vaginal canal magical? Does it confer livelihood? Does it confer life? Was this not a life, and then it passed through a body part, and magically it's life? Like that's infanticide. And you should say it's infanticide. It is infanticide. If you're in partial birth abortion is infanticide. even for people who are extreme on abortion, you have to be so fully dishonest, intellectually dishonest, not to recognize that a baby 1 minute before birth is a baby. That the argument ends there. I mean, there really is no argument beyond that. That's pure evil. That is pure evil. That is, you are blinding yourself to a pure, simple human fact. That is a baby. So, and if she still argues, then there's nothing you can do about that. Some people want to blind themselves to facts. So much of so much of leftism is based on the "please don't ruin my day" syndrome. Right? There's a reason that the left doesn't want to look at the Planned Parenthood videos, because that would actually force them to comprehend and confront the fact that they are okay with chopping up babies in the womb, and that these babies have hands and arms and organs and brains and faces. And so they don't want to look at any of that. All of leftism is based on willful, it's either ignorance or willful ignorance, and willful ignorance is actually evil.
Okay.
The last question. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Henry Talmark from German State University. Please don't misconstrue what I'm saying by any chance. I don't completely agree with what's happening down in Mizzou.
Mm-hmm.
The way they went about it, I'm not saying that I agree with it. But I'm a bit lost by when you say that the vision isn't, you said it's...
not the same as the conservative vision.
Yeah, I understand that. But when you say that it's not right, do you mean by bringing up the facts and points that's been going on in Mizzou is wrong, or the way they went about it is wrong?
Okay, so it depends on, so there's a couple things that's wrong with what the kids are doing at Mizzou. One is that their goal is wrong. Ousting administrators who are actually doing everything that they legally could to stop what was going on, which is what happened. I mean, if you actually look at the individual cases, that's wrong. You don't oust people, you don't indict the entire system for individual acts of evil, right? By that standard, you call for the impeachment of President Obama because something racist happened at Mizzou, right? Obama's the head of America, right? So that's number one. Number two, the way that they have been approaching this, not only by calling for firings of people who actually didn't do anything, but also by setting up black-only safe space, right? I mean, that's self-segregation. That's wrong. Beyond that, the race hoaxing that is happening, the exaggeration of what's happening on campus is utterly beyond me. And what I mean by that is that we've seen multiple cases in Mizzou of things that have been race hoax. So, for example, the president of the student body there, the student government. That guy's name is Peyton Head. Peyton Head was the originator of the. I was walking along on campus and a bunch of white guys drove by in a truck and yelled the N-word at me, right? Which, if it's true, is horrible. Obviously, they didn't investigate. He didn't even make a police report. First of all, if you want people to actually take you seriously, you need to make a police report and you need to report it so there can be an investigation. Otherwise, we're ghost hunting. Otherwise, we're just... I like solutions to problems. And okay, so that's number one. His statement that this is happening provided no possible solution because he couldn't track down the people. He gave no information. He didn't make a police report. And in fact, when a similar group of students did make a police report about a drunk white guy, the administration tracked down the drunk white guy and moved him off campus, and he's now in the process of possibly being expelled. So when you present evidence, then there will actually be ramifications to that. He didn't. The same guy said 2 days ago that the KKK had been spotted on campus. Needless to say, the KKK had not been spotted on campus because the KKK has not been a major force in American life for a very long time. And they weren't filming Birth of a Nation. The exaggeration that has attended so much of what's going on, the idea that microaggressions, what they're calling microaggressions, are something that ought to be fought against by the administration, to me is actually nasty. Okay, I'll tell you why. The term microaggression, there are a couple of things that the Mizzou students have been saying that are stupid. Okay, the white privilege point is stupid because the idea that just because you're white, you have some inherent privilege in American society, it's just not true. It depends on who the white person is. Right? There are more white people on welfare than there are black people on welfare. The fact is that Colin Powell's son has it a hell of a lot better than any of the people who are growing up in Appalachia, right? So to suggest that there is a universal white privilege that attaches to you because you're a white person, the truth is I can make a pretty strong counter-argument that there is a black privilege that attaches to programs like affirmative action and subprime housing and the EEOC's specific employment policies, right? Because when I got into UCLA, I had to have a higher score as a Jewish kid than some black people had to have getting into UCLA because there are quasi-affirmative action programs at UCLA. So that's number one. Number two, they've been talking about microaggressions. Microaggression is actually white privilege is basically shut up, you're white, you don't get to talk because you're white. And if you deny white privilege, that's just proof of your white privilege, which is incredibly Orwellian. Microaggression, which is the other thing they argue about, is they say that I have been microaggressed. If I find something insulting, you don't even have to intend it to be insulting. Right now, everything that I'm saying, I don't intend it to be insulting, clearly. But if you're insulted by it, I have microaggressed you. And what they want, and all these kids on campus want, and this is the dangerous part, is they want to be able to pull a gun on somebody who microaggresses. Okay, microaggression, the term itself is horrible. It's not a micro-insult. It's not even a mistaken insult. It's an aggression, right? How do you meet aggression? I'm a dude. Someone aggresses me, I punch them, right? If somebody touches me or punches me, I hit back. Aggression is met with aggression in civilization, right? To suggest that words are aggression and thus must be met with the students being banned from campus or the police being called for hurtful or hateful feelings, their agenda is wrong. They're exaggerating the facts of the case, and they're not even, and in some cases they're outright lying. The hunger striker is outright lying. Jonathan Butler, the kid who supposedly was hit by a car by the president, it's on tape. He ran into the car. He literally runs into the car. You can see it. The car is moving backwards. He starts following the car. The car reverses and moves about 6 inches forward, and he proceeds to bump into it about this hard. Seriously, you can watch the tape. It's amazing. And then he claimed that he proceeded to claim that he had been aggressed by the president. The president apologized because he's a huge lefty pansy. This is the reason why leftists only try this garbage on leftist university campuses, because leftists are pansies and they surrender to other lefties. Right? They tried this. They tried this with the right wing. If they tried Mitch Daniels, right, at Purdue, they tried this there, he would shut this down in a New York minute. So they don't want the same things. They lie about these cases, and then they suggest that you're a racist if you disagree with them. Okay, the black students at Mizzou who are doing this, and it's not all black students, the black students who are doing this at Mizzou said they took their lead from what was happening in Ferguson, Missouri. Ferguson, Missouri was a lie. Michael Brown, according to Eric Holder's Department of Justice, Eric Holder is a racist, and Eric Holder's Department of Justice found that Michael Brown was justifiably shot. Right, that Michael Brown was shot for good reason because he tried to grab a gun off a cop, assaulted the cop, punched him in the face, tried to run, turned around, and then charged the cop, according to the testimony of multiple witnesses, all of whom were black. Right, and they say, well, the protest movement that started in Ferguson, we brought it to Mizzou. Okay, first of all, the idea that if universities are such racist places of racism and sexism and rape, they're all hotbeds of all of these things, there's only one group in America that ought to be blamed, and it's the left, because there hasn't been a Republican in a position of power on a university campus since Woodrow Wilson was president. So that is my short take on what's going on University of Mizzou. Thanks so much.